Hello, welcome to this live stream. Thank you everybody very much for coming along today. Just while we're getting started, it would be great to see you write in the comments where you are joining us from today and what time it is. That would be really good to see. And then I will introduce myself and our expert today.
Yes, because we like to see, don't we, how many different countries people come from all teachers all across the globe. It's great.
It's always very exciting from wonderfully exotic places. Even if you don't think you live in an exotic place, yes, you do. It's exotic for somebody else.
Yeah, and of course, some people are just breakfast, and some people are getting ready for bed. Maybe I don't know.
Exactly. Yeah, so we've got Argentina, Brazil, Bogota, Netherlands, Bulgaria, many different ones coming through. I'd love to know what time it is with you guys. I'll start the introductions as we're going through this. My name is Philip Haynes. I am going to be the host of this session. I work for Oxford University Press as a professional development consultant, and I live in Mexico City. Here it is 9 o'clock in the morning. And Elaine, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, hi, I'm Elaine Boyd. I'm talking to you from the UK, on the south coast by the seaside, but of course very chilly seaside. And it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon here. A little bit about me. Yes, I started, like all of you, I've been teaching for most of my career. I've done a lot of teacher training as well. And certainly for about 25, 30 years now, I've been very involved with assessment. I've worked for different assessment organisations, and I've seen the changes that have happened to assessment, through this time. So that's what I generally focus on in my career.
Excellent. We should get started. Thank you very much, Elaine. We've got people, 10 o'clock at night. You should probably be in bed by now. Well, I would be in bed by now. Different places. You can't hear us. Oh, maybe my colleagues can answer that one. I'd like you to type into the chat respond to this question. How do your students respond to feedback? So you can kind of be discussing that in the chat as we go through the session. But I think, Elaine, maybe we should get started, right?
Yes.
No, before I forget, we will be sharing some things with you throughout the session. We will be sharing with you a sample from Insight, the second edition of Insight, which is coming out in January, a secondary school series, which has a lot of effective feedback elements and assessment for learning. And we will be sharing with you some other resources available on these particular topics. But are you ready, Elaine?
I am, yes. Let's get
Good. Okay, well, the first question is, I think, is this concept of assessment for learning. Could you give us an explanation of exactly what that is?
Yeah, Philip, I think that's a really good start to the conversation, to make sure maybe that we all sort of are talking about the same thing, even though it's a very broad concept. I would say that, obviously we use assessment of learning, assessment for learning a lot now. And I think it can make us as teachers very nervous because we think, oh, assessment, it's all about exams and tests. And we get nervous and the students get nervous. So I think the sort of really important point to sort of note about assessment for learning is that it's not about exams and tests. It's about teachers observing the kind of progress that the students are making. So we are doing assessments, we are assessing, but in the broadest sense, it might be a little vocabulary test you do in class, but it might be how you listen to and watch your students. So you've got that whole spectrum of how you're sort of judging your students. And what we're trying to do is we're not trying to get them to pass or fail something. We and they are trying to find out about their learning and how strong and solid their learning is. So I think there's two important things about it. One is it's ongoing, it happens all the time. And I would guess most of you are already doing a lot of this, whether you think of it as assessment or not. As a teacher, you're judging your learners. But the other thing, which is the loop for today, is it's very important when we do this that we have feedback from that process. So normally, if you take a big exam, you get your score and that's it, that's the end of it. Assessment for learning is completely different. It's about monitoring and evaluating progress and getting feedback. And from that feedback, it might be for us as teachers so that we know we have to repeat something in class or we can move on, or it might be for the learners to know how well they're doing, or other people like parents or whatever involved in the process. So I think what's hard to grasp is it feels like such a broad concept, but actually it's just a name for what a lot of us are doing already, I think.
I think that's really important, yeah, because every time you walk into a classroom and you look at your students, you're doing some kind of assessment.
Exactly.
I like to think about the traditional assessment of learning as just looking backwards, whereas assessment for learning is very much looking at the present
Yes.
and which way to go forward, whether that is changes for what we're going to be doing or changes for what the students are going to be doing.
Yes, I agree with that. It's something I call, when we do those big exams, assessment of learning, some of you might call it summative assessment. That's what I call event testing. It's a moment in time, it's an event. But I think assessment for learning is a story, it's the narrative of somebody's learning. And if you think of it like that, then perhaps a single assessment, like your students not doing very well on that little vocabulary test, doesn't matter so much. It's about what happens over time and where they go over time.
Yeah, so it may seem like a new concept, but really, if you look at your classes, I don't think it is that new. I think
Yes.
we had a question here from Ecuador, Orlando Noriega, and the question was: is assessment for learning part of ongoing assessment? I think we've answered that. Have we answered
Yes,
that
yes,
one?
I think it is. It's something you might do. I mean, I know a lot of you will feel you're interested in this, but also a lot of you will have to do it because a lot of ministries of education are now insisting on this type of formative assessment. But it can vary. It might be something you're conscious of doing every week or every month, or throughout the term. So in that sense, it's ongoing in that each bit you do informs the next bit, as it were. So yeah.
Very good. We've got comments coming through about the question I asked you. How do students respond to feedback? Some of them like to have feedback directly, but some prefer to be delivered in a class discussion.
Yes.
It's gonna be different for different students, and especially working with teens, they're all of different kinds, right?
Yes. I think the thing about feedback is, I mean, I don't know if we want to sort of launch into this now, but as I said, that there is the theory is that the purpose of assessment for learning isn't about the assessment. It's to get this feedback. It's to understand where the students are and what other help they need. So I think if we really focus on that feedback, and we've got more examples of this and go into more detail in the effective feedback paper that OUP have published. But to kind of summarize that, I would say that it's probably important, and again, I'm sure you'll be aware of this, not to have just one type of feedback. So there are so many different types that you might have individual oral feedback, individual written feedback. In these days of online learning, you might have video feedback. you might ask your students to feedback to each other. There's all sorts of ways of doing it. I think what's important, the same as with your teaching, is to mix it up, to do a lot of, different varieties, so that through the course of a week or a month or a term, the students all have different options of how they're getting feedback. But this kind of leads me on to sort of an important point. I don't know how you feel about this, Philip. I think it's actually core to a lot of this, which is involve your students, keep your students informed. So, for example, if you want to give them a variety of different types of feedback, explain that to them at the beginning of term, so they're not just expecting one thing. Would you say?
I think the more that the students understand what the teacher is doing, the easier it becomes for students.
Yeah.
Not them having to guess what the teacher is looking for, or trying to work out why the teacher is doing something. So make things quite explicit.
Yes.
Is
And
a good idea.
kind of manage their expectations, so they don't think, oh, I'm always going to get individual feedback, or I'm always going to get oral feedback. I know my teacher's going to mix it up a bit. So, my time for individual feedback will come around, because I know time is, I think a lot of teachers get worried, don't they? Because as soon as you say assessment for learning, teachers think, well, I've got all the curriculum to get through, I've got the course book to get through. When am I going to do this? When am I going to do feedback? But I would say, I would guess a lot of you are doing this already. You're going around, you're listening to your students. You've got a view about them, about how well they're doing, and you probably do already give them sort of information about that. But I think with assessment for learning, we go into this in more detail. The paper, it's about how you give that feedback, and how you structure the feedback, I think.
You mentioned something really interesting about time. No single teacher has enough time to do everything they have to and the things they want to do. But I think that when you implement more assessment for learning, it actually saves you time.
Yes.
You're going to have to experiment. Like, I think the best teachers are the ones who experiment and try new things and accept when they fail. So try new things and see what works in your classroom.
Yeah.
And there was a question here that came up. Now, where was it? If I could find it. Oh, about speaking. Yes, this comes from Anna in Portugal. I would like to ask if written feedback is more effective than oral feedback. Which one is more profitable to students?
Well, that's interesting, isn't it? That comes back to what we were just talking about the content of the feedback. There's been a bit of research on this recently, and it seems that younger students, so young learners, maybe adolescents, teens, who a lot of you are teaching, seem to respond better to oral feedback. But that doesn't mean that's just what we should be giving. Sometimes they need written feedback, but it's all about how you give it, isn't it? So I would say, especially with young learners and teens, and possibly even some adults, don't sort of, let's not overload them with information. So I think, key feature of assessment for learning is letting students know what you're evaluating them on. So you might do a speaking activity and you might say, well, today I'm going to focus on your pronunciation, or today I'm going to focus on your communication skills. So that's your judgment criteria, your assessment criteria. So then don't start giving them feedback on hundreds of things. Just give them feedback on the thing that you said you would judge them on the objective you would judge them on. So, perhaps they did well, perhaps they need to improve. And then the important thing is to give them a way to improve, to give them a single tip of how to improve. And although oral feedback might seem sort of rather ephemeral and it disappears, you structure it so that it's right, the feedback is about this, this is what you did well, this is what you can improve on this single point, and here's a single activity to help you improve, then it's more manageable for young learners and teenage brains to process.
Yeah, and another couple of things there. I mean, I think when the teacher actually talks directly to you, the student, and not just to the class, that those are things that you remember. The teacher is actually paying attention to me. And for those students who are quite weak is the wrong word, but there are students who are not good at a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
If you give them one concrete thing which will help them move in the right direction, that's better than just mentioning lots of different things.
Yeah, and it comes back to our point about assessment for learning being ongoing. So, for example, if you've got a student and they're speaking, they make a lot of mistakes, or the pronunciation's terrible, or they're not very good at staying on task, don't try and tackle it all at once. With assessment for learning, you've got time to do each point across the term. And I mean, I know as teachers we might be worried and we might want them to produce something, you know, that's more correct in or skills based, but I think it's about being patient and just seeing that progress over time and dealing with it in little bite-sized steps rather than all at once.
Yeah, there are so many questions coming through. Here's a question. I won't be able to pronounce the name because I'm a dyslexia. I just can't pronounce names. I'm not familiar with it. It's ABDELHAMID. Don't know how to pronounce that because of my dyslexia. The question is, how can summative assessment be beneficial to students and teachers in final examinations? Here we have it on the screen. Thank you very much. Yes.
Okay. Well, of course, this is not what we would say assessment for learning. This is assessment of learning.
But this is the reality of teachers, right?
Yes, but and so we do, don't we? We tend to have to give them summative assessments at the end of term, at the end of the year, and often those summative assessments are reported, you know, to parents or people that are sort of important in our learners' lives, or the learners themselves. And I think you can apply some of the same principles. I think we've moved on from the days where students, oh, you just get given this test and that's it. So I think the thing is, again, the same. Make sure that what you are assessing them on, if you have a choice about it, is something that you have done in class that is connected to real life. So we're talking about being beneficial to students so that they can actually see how that assessment connects to their progress in this case, in using English in their real life. So it's all the work you do going into that assessment is really important. And for me personally, I would say it's not about doing lots of practice tests. It's about this sharing that Philip was talking about at the beginning, this sharing information with students. What are they going to be assessed on? What are the real life tasks that you can put into that assessment? And then, you know, then what you can deal, although they might get a single score from this, you can give them feedback as well on what they've done wrong, as long as you're not trying to give them too much. And so maybe some of this, you know, comes down the question you're asking there about it connecting with their final exams, which of course is a very tense moment, is about giving them confidence in what they're doing. And strangely, they get more confident, not from doing hundreds of practice tests, but feeling more connected with the tasks that they're doing and the kind of feedback you give them as a teacher from that.
I like practice tests personally, but I think we can use that, but we can use them not just to do the practice,
Yes.
I mean, to develop the skills for the test,
Yeah.
but also I think a teacher can dip into those tests and take out information which can drive the students forward.
Yes, yeah.
Well, maybe this links to this one from Ala from Ukraine. what are ways to motivate students? Oh, I think assessment for learning and motivation, there's quite a link, isn't there?
Yes, yes, there's a very strong link. And actually, there's been quite a lot of research on this. I mean, I don't know if we can all remember as children, but we liked being given, of course you can, we like being given challenges, don't we, that we can do. You know, or can you jump over that? Or can you do that? And so actually, kind of assessments that are unthreatening can be very, very motivating. And being unthreatening is about the student understanding exactly what they're going to do and what they're being judged on. And also, this is a key point, being successful. I think we tend to sort of think of assessment as, oh, what don't you know? What have you got wrong? You know, what's the missing score? But actually, it can be very motivating if you're very successful at something. And I would say what's a really good idea, and I know time's an issue, but certainly with young learners and teens, I would always repeat the assessment. Always repeat it, because then they do better the second time, and in their head they've got a model of success and they feel good about themselves. So
Yeah, models showing them what they should be going towards, pushing them outside their comfort zone into the. I'm thinking one of the things from the position paper that we have, into the learning zone, but not into the panic zone.
yes,
Not
yes,
pushing them too far.
it's a step they can see. Yes,
Yeah, and I in a classroom, we've got the very strong students, fantastic. Whatever we do, they're going to learn independent of what we're doing. It's the weaker students that interest me. What can you do for them? You know, prove to them they can do something. So
yes, yes. Well,
making it
I
at the
think
right level.
this sort of feedback model, isn't it, that you always try to give them some feedback on something they've done well. So again, especially with young learners and teens, I'd make sure that you tell them before you know, maybe you're just doing, as we said, this assessment for learning is very informal. It might be that you give them a speaking task in class, but tell them before, oh, I'm going to come around and listen to you, but not I'm going to come around and listen to you. I'm going to come around and listen to you. And what I'm going to be listening for is, you know, do you get started straight away? Are you talking to your partner, and your pronunciation? So that when they've finished the task, maybe you want to give the class some feedback, you can say to them, you were all brilliant at getting started. You were all brilliant at talking to each other. But now let's look at your pronunciation. For example, I'm just giving that, you know, and you know, the same with writing. You know, you might say, right, I want you to do this writing, and I'm going to judge you on, you know, how quickly you get started, and then how accurate your vocabulary is, for example, so that there's always something in there that they're successful at. And it might be connected with their behavior, you know, if they're younger.
Oh, and also for those the wrong word again, horrible students. We always have one of those students who's not our favorite. You know, you worked really well today. You know, that's nothing
Yes,
about the language. It's about, you know, I noticed that you did something well.
yes,
Your
yes,
English is terrible,
yes,
but you were here with us and you worked well. You know,
yes.
one of the things we have related to our paper on this particular on effective feedback is 2 medals and a mission. Is that something that you work with, Elaine?
Yes,
Well, it's kind of what you just said, I think.
it might be one or two, you know, but I think what the idea of medals and a mission is, you know, it's just a way of capturing, if you like, visually what you're doing, which is, you know, always something you did well, and then something I'd say not you got wrong, but something you can improve.
Yes.
And then here is how to improve it. So as a teacher, you know, maybe they get vocabulary wrong, and you say to them, okay, good way to remember vocabulary is to put the words on your mirror, and when you're cleaning your teeth in the morning, you know, go through the words. So just a little tip to help them, so they're not left, well, I don't know how to do that.
Oh yeah, yes. Try harder. Doesn't help
Yeah,
anybody, does it?
yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
what can I do to try harder?
yeah.
We discussed.
Picking up on that point, Philip.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I would say, as I say, what we've been talking about is the fact that a lot of us are assessing, we're collecting data, evaluating our students all the time. But I'd be really careful of feedback that's just good. I mean, what's good? Good that you finish the task, good that you use the language, good that you're a good person. I try and give them sort of really concrete information.
I think, yeah, that. Oh, I'm getting excited now. I think that's probably a fundamental thing, isn't it? It's like, instead of just saying what they did well, what action can drive them slightly further forwards?
Yes. And not something too huge, just a baby step that they think, yes, it's this idea of success. Yes, I can do that. And if students think they can do it, they identify themselves as successful, and then they feel more motivated and engaged.
And there are students who come into our classrooms who do not have brilliant lives outside our classrooms.
Yes.
And if we can make that 15 minutes a very safe place where, this teacher knows I'm here,
yes,
and is offering me things to drive me forward. It's such simple things.
Yeah.
We have so many questions, and I feel so bad about not being able to respond to one. We've got Jenny Pross. I don't know if that would be brought up on the screen. Could you say more about repeating the assessment, Elaine? Like version A and version B of the same activity, not repeating exactly what's the same thing in exactly the same way, I imagine.
Well, actually, I would say, the younger the class, do it exactly the same. In fact, I would say not necessarily the next day, but maybe a few days later. You can imagine, oh, yes, I know this. I know how to do this. If you think of small children, they like knowing things and knowing how to think. How often when parents read stories to they want to go back over, and you've got to make the same noises and the same sounds and whatever. They love it because it makes them feel confident. So I would say, certainly with young learners, I'd be tempted to repeat the task exactly as is, so that they can see that they've made some progress. With teens, yes, you might want to twist it a bit, but I wouldn't hide that. I'd point that out to them. I'd remind them, look, this is the same as we did last week, but we're changing this a bit. And I wouldn't worry. I mean, again, I do appreciate time is an issue, but I wouldn't worry about repeating things 2 or 3 times, until they had that model of success in their head.
It's like learning a song you really like. You listen to it 100 times, you learn it. There's nothing wrong with going back. And saving time. Why create more time for yourself? You've got a life outside your classroom.
Yes.
Why do that when you can bring the same thing in, but you change the instructions or the tasks slightly?
Yeah.
Oh, this is so exciting, isn't it? I think I can combine 2 things. I've got Retha says, any tips? Oh, it's gone. Any tips that might help peers give feedback to each other? I want to combine that with, what benefits does feedback in pairs give us?
Right. Okay. Now, I think this is a really important point to talk about. It's not just about teacher feedback, is it? We know that some of us, we've already said time is an issue. So let's see if we can help with feedback by, the students doing self-assessment, to think, how well am I doing? Do I judge for myself? And then doing peer feedback. And again, I would say this whole, you can do peer feedback, even with small children. It's all about the baby steps and giving them a model of what to work for. So it might be, when they're young, you just say, Luca, did you like Maria's, talk just now? Or, whatever it is you happen to be doing, so that you support them in the initial stages of peer feedback. And they get used to the idea that they don't have to say whether something's good or correct. They could just say they liked something, and then you could say, and can you make a suggestion to Maria? So instead of, it becoming a thing about what's wrong, what, make a suggestion to Maria to improve things. And then slowly, as you go through the school year, or as the students get older and older, they get used to managing this peer feedback, and I would say group feedback. Now, I think one thing is, yes, it can save you a bit of time. They're perhaps speaking more while they're doing it, or maybe they're doing a little checklist. They're doing some reading and writing while they're doing their peer feedback. But the other thing that's really important, I think we recognize this as adults, is it's critical to see what other people are doing, because it gives us a sense of where we are. So while I'm feeding back to you, I'm also making a judgment of, oh, I did that bit wrong,
Completely
or
agree.
oh,
Yes.
my bits. So it helps you judge your work, and to get other ideas from other students as well.
Yeah, peer feedback is such a useful thing. I think we do need to train our students if they're not familiar with that. But
Yes.
again, it's putting things into the classroom, trying things out, seeing what works.
Yes.
And I think the best piece of advice I can ever give teachers is try things. And when they don't work, don't be surprised they don't work, but you will learn so much.
Well, I would also say a very strong tip is to explain to students what you're doing. I mean, for example, in the past, when I've taught university students who are working in English as a second language, university students have got, they've been through the education system. They've got a very strong idea. They think of what feedback is tell me what I did right and tell me what I did wrong, so that's what's in their heads. And it's very, very hard to sort of get them to move on from that and recognize it's not about correcting mistakes. It's about improvement, whatever. So I would say what I'm coming round to sort of try to say here is it's really important, again, to share with your students what you're doing. So we are going to do you're going to feed back to each other. And the reason we're doing this is because, so that they understand, and they're not, well, why doesn't the teacher just tell me what I've done wrong,
Yeah, it's the job of the teacher. Well, no, there's the working together in peers, there's like at least 5 different objectives from that.
Yes, yeah.
So many things coming through. I like this one. Again, I can't read names I'm not familiar with. Saira. Dyslexia. Yeah, should be easy, but I can't do that because I'm dyslexic. I like this. How do you manage feedback in large classes? Because yes, if you've got 15 students in your class, fantastic, but that's not the reality of some teachers. So any ideas on that one?
Well, again, I mean, I would try and allow some time for some individual self-assessment in what one, you can train them in self-assessment. So, if you finish a task, right, it could be anything. It could be a vocab test. They've got 2 wrong. Why did they get, why did they think they got those two wrong? Or why did they get things right? Maybe they've got time to exchange ideas with each other. I mean, if you're really stuck, you could just have a sort of chart or checklist on the board, and go through and, tick things that they've done well, question mark for, things for improve that you can start to fill in as they're working, maybe. And then you could give a general point at the end about, for example, you all seem to be struggling a little bit with this grammar. So what I want you to do is do this exercise, or go home tonight and do this, just to point so that they're doing a joint thing. But I'm not trying to, downsize it. I know teaching a big class is a real challenge, but it can't, just be one way. They've got to learn. Somehow the students have got to learn to process feedback.
Yeah, I mean, if we can't give a lot of individual feedback, try to get to every single student, from time to time. But I think the feedback would be more kind of that overview of the class and giving that general feedback.
It doesn't have to be all the time. I mean, something we haven't sort of talked about yet, but again, expand on in the effective feedback paper is that something that's very important part of assessment for learning is the teacher keeping a record of things, is monitoring things. So it might be that that's so important because it allows you to see progress over time and not worry about a single event. But you see, that might mean if you've got a very big class and you haven't got time for that feedback, nevertheless, you're noting, you've got your student list, so you're noting what's going on, and you can come back to it later, or you can build it into your classes, or you can give them some information at the end of the week. This is how this week went. You did really well at this. I'd like you to improve at this. So that again, in a way, teachers are always doing this. You're doing it in your head, aren't you? As you go through the week or the term, you're like, oh, yes, we've got here. But it's about writing it down. And actually, I think with the drive, as it were, for assessment for learning, it's an important protection for teachers. I know that sounds rather dramatic, but it means you've got an objective record of what the students are doing, so that when a parent turns up or a student asks you, you're not saying something off the top of your head. You've got a record, and that record sort of protects the work you've been doing and protects your input as a teacher.
Yeah, so if you've got a very large class, make some note about every single student. I mean, it's going to be through several classes, several weeks possibly, that you're building this up.
And maybe you agree with them every 2 weeks. You'll give them some feedback,
But most of it's going to be general feedback to the class because of the practicalities.
Yes. Yeah.
But observing classes, some of the most fantastic teachers are the ones who are dealing with these big classes, and just the classroom management skills of those teachers is fantastic.
Yeah.
Do you have a question, Elaine, that came up in our earlier that you would like to address?
Yes, I haven't got access to that paper.
Do you remember more or less what it was?
There was a question. Somebody asked a question near the beginning about errors. I don't know if you've got that. You can read it out to me.
How do you correct student errors? Was that the one?
Yes. Now, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think this loops back in a way to our whole approach to assessment for learning. I would say let's not focus on errors. Let's focus on what students can do, and try and think of it as how can we improve rather than actual mistakes. And I think this kind of comes back to sort of 2 points, which is one, we've said, tell the students what you're assessing them on. So, it might be that they might make grammatical errors, but if you're assessing them on their communication skills and they manage to communicate, then you don't need to talk about errors. That's for another time. That's for another task. So it makes students very nervous if there's always a focus on errors. The same as when we look at their writing, sometimes there's a tendency to sort of see where they've made a spelling mistake or grammatical mistake. But there's also, did that piece of writing communicate? Did it get across the point? And can they then slowly improve those issues over time? It might be you don't want to talk to the students about those errors, that you take note of it as a teacher and you change what you're teaching them in the next lessons to make sure they have plenty of practice to try and improve those errors.
That's so interesting. I mean, we're still going to give feedback on errors, but I like to think about accuracy focused stages of the class and fluency focused stages of the class. And typically the fluency focused stages of the classes, you're not going to be
exactly
giving feedback because it tends to stop the students speaking.
Yes.
Let them speak. And with writing, I think one of my favorite activities for writing is that, yes, you've got a big class, you collect all the pieces of writing, but you pull out the 10 most interesting mistakes, you put them on the board, delayed correction, the students work together and try to work out what the answers are, and then as a whole class, you correct them. I mean, we're still doing some correction work.
Yes.
But yeah, correction work can demotivate students, if that is the correct
Yes.
word.
Yes. Yeah. Especially younger students. It is, we have to, it all comes back to why are they learning English. They're learning English, maybe they will, for most of them it's going to be in the end game is about study or work that they might have to operate in a bit of English, and so it's about what do they need and what are those communication skills. And as I say, you might want to take the view that errors is something, as Philip just said, that you decide to tackle as a teacher rather than putting the focus on the student to correct the error, as it were. Yeah.
Yeah, that's another huge topic for another day.
You.
Yeah. I think we need to kind of move on to the last question. I feel so bad. So many questions coming through, and I apologize to everybody. I've been looking at your questions. We just can't respond to them right now. I was going to ask you, Elaine, do you have any tips for teachers to make them feel confident about implementing assessment for learning and effective feedback?
Yes, as I say, I mean, I do appreciate that a lot of teachers are having this sort of imposed on them, as well as teachers recognizing that it's an important part of progress in their students. But of course, we've all been focused on teaching, on the learning moment, haven't we? So to have to shift our thinking to sort of really try and focus on assessment, can be a bit unnerving. But in terms of confidence, I would say, yeah, three things. One is, as we said at the beginning, most of you are, all of you, I would think, are already doing this. It's not about a little test. It's about evaluating, about judging your teachers and your students. And most of you are already doing this in your classes all the time. So have confidence that you're doing it. It's just perhaps a question of recording it, formalizing it a bit, or making it a bit more focused, but you're definitely already doing it. And so connected to that point, I would say if you want to sort of turn that judgment into assessment for learning, think about recording it, making a record, whether you've got, depending on your number of students, little student names and you give them ticks and crosses, or you make little notes on them. In some way, record what's in your head, your judgment about the students, and then you can actually see over time, and you might find one student is better than you thought, or one student is worse than you thought, or that you have to adjust your teaching or whatever. So it's much easier to see that when you've got that record. And as I said, then it's a protection for you, because you think, I'm confident because I know that I've got that written down. So if that, if somebody asks me about that student, I know what to say. So that's confidence. And I think the third thing, which again, probably many of you are doing, is really try and collaborate with the other teachers that you work with. Assessment is a joint, it's a collaborative activity. When we make exams, we never sort of create them alone. So find out what the other teachers in your school are doing, or find out, if you can do joint projects together. Find out if you can help each other to give you a bit of confidence in what you're doing.
I completely agree with that. Knowing what the teacher is doing in the next classroom. I mean, it's almost impossible to go and observe them.
Yes.
Because we're teaching at the same time. But if they could record 5 minutes on their phone,
yes,
and not necessarily facing the students, because that can be problematic, but facing the teacher and just watching that.
Yeah.
And as I said, kind of discussing the way that things are being
Yeah.
done.
Or just saying, look, I've marked these like this. Do you agree with this? Do you agree with what? Am I being fair? Are we doing the same thing? Yeah.
Yeah. Or no, I think you're doing it completely wrong. Seeing what other teachers are doing, you don't have to struggle on your own.
Yeah.
For your own well-being.
Yeah.
Well, again, more things coming through. Feel so bad about not being able to address them. I think we need to be wrapping up this session. So let's just go to the final part. So if you've enjoyed this, we would really appreciate if you like it. If you've loved it, we would appreciate you to love it. Please leave comments and share. This is all about you, the teachers, which are our teaching community, because honestly, without you, this doesn't happen, or my job doesn't exist. Can you tell us what kind of things you would like us to be looking at next? You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube at OUP Global. I'm trying to remember if I've forgotten anything. Well, last but not least, I would like to give a huge thank to Elaine Boyd for joining us today. Really enjoyed talking to you.
Yeah.
Hope we've helped some people. Anything you'd like to say just before we leave the session?
No, just lovely to sort of, that so many teachers are interested in this. And I think it's, really going to help learners a lot.
Yeah, go off into your classes and try these things. So I think with that, we'll wrap up. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your morning, afternoon, evening.
Weekend.
And weekend. Well, depending where in the world and how your weekends are divided. Yes. Thank you very much. Take care.
Bye.
We'll be in touch. Bye.